In the genteel drawing rooms of Flaxborough, velvet curtains hide more than the fading daylight. They conceal a scandal that drapes itself over the town like heavy fabric. A quarrel unspoken, a secret tugged loose, and a shadow lingering just beyond the folds leave one pressing question. Who dares to pull the curtain back? Before this case unfolds, remind yourself. Every silence speaks, and every detail whispers. What's your favourite era for a good mystery? Share it in the comments. Enjoy stories wrapped in riddles and secrets. You're in the right place. Subscribe to join the circle of seekers. Now, pour yourself something warm, draw the curtains close, and let's uncover the truth. The town hall assembly room wore its new curtains like a lady of a certain age in an unaccustomed hat. Proud of the expense, apprehensive of the effect. They were of crimson velvet, heavy enough to force a respectful silence upon the room, with a fringe that promised to mollycoddle any draft attempting a democratic entry. The Borough Council had scheduled a small, dutiful ceremony to admire them before the Light Operatic Society's rehearsal. Nothing was to be unveiled exactly, but the word had crept into the printed programme nevertheless. In Flaxborough, even the ordinary requires tape. Mr. Beasley, caretaker of the premises, and a man who handled keys as though they were parish relics, had been polishing the brass doorplates since dawn. He viewed the new curtains with the wary tenderness of a grandfather allotted to a lively grandchild, pleased by their presence and prepared for their mischief. When he tugged at the draw cord for a preliminary slide, the crimson mass shivered, gathered, and flowed with a seriousness that impressed him. The fringe swung with modesty. A good curtain, then, at least by temperament. By 10 o'clock the invited dignitaries had gathered in thin, officious shoals. Councillor Ada Crick, who specialised in culture and therefore wore it, stood at the front with Mayor Biddlecombe, a man who addressed most problems as if they were municipal hedges requiring only a level top. Mr. Trevor Birtle of Birtle & Sons Furnishers was also present, fretting over a speck on his lapel that no one else could see. The curtains were, after all, his triumph, and more privately his invoice. "Friends," the mayor began, "we are assembled to express our heartfelt gratitude to those who, labour for the beautification of our civic life." At a nod from Councillor Crick, Beasley tugged the cord. The curtains drew together with the sound of a wealth being gently reprimanded. They paused, like a well-trained dog at a crossing. Everyone admired the hush they made. Then Councillor Crick, who had rehearsed a little bow to accompany her line, "See how our stage, once drab, becomes a portal to delight," said, "See how our—" and did not finish. She had noticed what several others only now saw. At the centre top, where a roundel, bearing the borough coat of arms, ought to have declared authority and history, there was a paler patch of velvet like a shorn lawn, faintly visible even under the electric sconces. The arms, 3 eels rampant, a barley sheaf couchant, and the Latin motto that nobody entirely trusted, were gone. Not torn off, not roughly handled, but absent with a deliberation that left people's mouths doing the thinking for their eyes. The mayor made the sort of sound a baritone produces when his chair is taken away at the end of a long aria. Mr. Birtle stepped forward, his polishing cloth a flag of truce. "One moment. There may have been a temporary removal for adjustment," he said, hurriedly exploring the verb tenses as if butter knives. "In transit, perhaps. In transit to where?" Councillor Crick's voice, though mild, had the chime of cutlery properly laid. "Mr. Birtle, the borough arms are not a rosette you pin on for race day." A muffling hush fell, the hush of people deciding whether the appropriate response was indignation or relief, that something, at any rate, had happened. Beasley swallowed and looked at the cord as if it had betrayed him. Somewhere in the back, a cough made the acoustics admire themselves. It was not a scandal in any healthy sense, no blood, no nakedness, but it was a deficiency, and Flaxborough disliked nothing more than that. Deficiencies whittled at reputation, and in a town where several people's careers consisted entirely of defending the image of a tidy ship from the reality of a leaky one, this was serious. "Mr. Beasley," said the mayor kindly, as if asking after a nephew, "would you be so good as to fetch Inspector Purbright? Tell him we have a small matter of, disappearance." Beasley inclined his head in a way that said the police were an inevitability on a par with winter, and slipped out with a speed that suggested long practice. By 11, the town had reacted. Gossip, which in Flaxborough moved like a polite epidemic, travelled from the assembly room to the marketplace, through the Empire Cafe with its glass cabinet of buns that had achieved a moral stance, and on to Mrs. Plackett's hair salon, where small news was teased into large. The Empire, at a round table where women performed civic oversight in teaspoons, agreed that the loss of the arms was either a political gesture, though opinions differed as to what politics might be discovered in embroidery, or a symptom of modern values. In Mrs. Plackett's, 2 clients wrapped like parcels considered who would benefit from a crest in their possession. Blackmail, suggested one deliciously. You know what they say about mottos? There's always someone who understands Latin too well. Mrs. Plackett, snipping, smiled mysteriously. She knew exactly no Latin, but her scissors gave a clip that implied entire volumes. Purbright arrived at the town hall quietly and slightly damp about the hat, having been required, by both a drizzle and Sergeant Love's enthusiasm to cross the marketplace at a more purposeful pace than he enjoyed. Inspector Purbright wore ordinariness with the same success as other men wear charm. He took in at a glance the anxious mayor, the chilly councillor, the affronted Beasley, and the anxious merchant, and contrived to look more interested in the curtains than in any of them. "Inspector," said Mayor Biddlecombe, relieved into joviality, "we have suffered a species of subtraction." "So I gather," Purbright replied, surveying the pale oval like a dentist encountering a familiar gap. "When were the curtains installed, Mr. Birtle?" "Last evening," Birtle said. "We finished at, 8:30 thereabouts. The arms were certainly present then. I supervised the fixing myself." "You had a key to the building?" "Mr. Beasley remained," Birtle said quickly. "He is always present. We do not, self-help with public property." Beasley, who had no desire to be dragged into syntax, nodded. "Locked up at 9, Inspector. I did my rounds at midnight too. Habit-like. Curtains were as you see them, only darker. Arms looked cheerful." "Midnight is a sociable hour for a caretaker," Purbright observed mildly. "Sometimes the boilers fancy attention," Beasley said. "They're like councillors, Inspector. Want to be known for doing their duty." Purbright stepped closer to the stage. He did not touch the velvet, which managed to look injured at a brush, but bent to see the hem. There, where the cords ran through brass rings, one ring was curiously a different colour, duller with a ginger tinge, copper perhaps, or fairy mischief. He leaned further and noticed, on the floorboards just inside the skirting, a faint dusting as though someone had applauded vigorously with their pockets. Not sawdust, not quite. A softer, talc-like bloom that clung to the edge of his shoe. Sergeant Love arrived with a notebook that aspired to be a shield. Young, earnest, and handsome in an undemanding way, he looked from inspector to curtains and back again as though measuring the leap between the two. "Prank, sir," he ventured. "Students? There's a crowd at the technical college who call themselves the daddyists. Might be to do with that." "In Flaxborough, Sergeant," Purbright said, "most people's sense of modern art is a wall calendar from the bank. Mr. Birtle, did you remove the arms for any reason? Rethreading, perhaps? Adjustment to the backing?" "My dear Inspector," Birtle protested, "one does not unpick heraldry. The fabric cost— the public would be amazed." "The public," Councillor Crick said sharply, "would be amazed at many things, Mr. Birtle, if only they were allowed to see the invoices." Purbright could have smiled, had his face been less reluctant to squander currency. He indicated the pale patch. "It has been unstitched carefully," he said, almost to himself. "No torn naps. Whoever did it was not angry." "Then why take it?" the mayor asked helplessly. "It's no use to anyone. It's not as if one could display it over the mantel." "People display all sorts of things over mantels," Purbright said, "sometimes themselves." He straightened. "Mr. Beasley, the building from 9 o'clock last night until this morning. Who came and went?" "Only me, Inspector, and the cleaners at 6, Mrs. Tate and her niece. She'll tell you her niece is a tower of virtue, even if she did run off with a window fitter during Lent." Sergeant Love made a note. Perhaps of Lent. Perhaps of window fitters. "We can speak to them, sir." "We shall," Purbright said. "Also, to the gentleman who installed these rings. There is always one piece of a set that refuses to belong." His gaze drifted back to the talc-like residue at the skirting. He did not stoop to collect it. Instead, he looked up at the pelmet and the cornice, handsome with tooling. "Has any work been done above?" "Only the pelmet," Birtle said. "New batten, strong as anything." "Strength," Purbright murmured, "is so often confused with permanence." "It rarely is." He turned to Councillor Crick. "You will want a statement to the press that nothing serious has occurred, and that the Light Operatic Society will rehearse as usual." "Of course," she said, bristling with duty. But is nothing serious occurring, Inspector? Purbright's face offered a polite uncertainty. I find seriousness depends less on the object, and more on the story that has attached itself to it. In the meantime, would you keep the room locked when not in use? Curtains are at their best when they are not available. He left them the way he had entered, unobtrusively, with Sergeant Love in quiet tow. In the stairwell, the faint, sweet smell that sometimes floats out of the haberdashery drifted to meet them. Love sniffed. Violets, sir? Lavender wax, Purbright said, favoured by people who have nothing to hide and wish to be thought of as people who have nothing to hide. He looked, for a moment, amused by something that had not yet happened. We shall let the town enjoy its deficiency for a day. It will tell us who misses the arms most. On the pavement the drizzle had done the decent thing and recommenced. Across the square, at the Empire Café, 2 women had already adjusted their seating to face the town hall doors directly. One of them raised a hand in a little wave to the police, the gesture of a citizen whose curiosity had become civic engagement. Sir, Love said, do you think it's political after all? In Flaxborough, Purbright replied, politics is what people say when they can't remember who owes whom a favour. Let us suppose for the present that someone took the borough's face because they meant to show it to somebody else. They walked on without haste. Behind them, beyond the heavy doors, the new curtains waited with expensive patience, the pale patch at their crown like a discreet bandage on a very public person. In a town that avoided melodrama, it was enough to begin. By mid-afternoon, Flaxborough had managed to embroider the bare fact of the missing borough arms into a respectable tapestry of scandal. The crimson curtains, having been put to no musical purpose yet, had already taken on a moral burden, and the pale patch at their crown was fast becoming a blank canvas upon which citizens dabbed their own suspicions. Mrs. Birtwistle, who lived 2 doors from the town hall and whose eyesight was largely conjectural, insisted that she had observed 2 men in bowler hats, slipping into the building at an hour she calculated to be midnight, but which might, with equal honesty, have been any time between 8:30 and cock-crow. Mr. Roper, a retired railway clerk whose chief delight was disproving Mrs. Birtwistle, announced at the Empire Café that he had seen no such thing, and that Mrs. Birtwistle's clocks had all been known to gain their morals as well as their minutes. By tea-time, one rumour had gained traction, that the crest had been stolen by students from the Technical College as part of some avant-garde protest against bourgeois velvet. Another rumour, advancing with more relish, proposed that the loss was an inside job and that the curtains were never meant to display the arms at all, the omission being a cunning device by Mr. Birtle to ensure a second invoice. In the police station, Sergeant Love read snippets of these accounts aloud from his notebook, his voice balancing dutiful respect with a barely concealed relish. And Mrs. Gedge, of Fish Street, says her cousin told her the arms have been spirited away to Hull, sir. A sort of ransom, she thinks, though she wasn't clear on what. Purbright at his desk leaned back in his chair and tapped his fingertips together lightly. Ransom presumes value, Love. A borough crest is of value chiefly to a borough, and only if it still has pride left to attach to it. Love, unsure whether this was philosophy or instruction, made a note nevertheless. Shall I make inquiries at the Technical College, sir? Not yet, Purbright replied gently. Youth has enough burdens without being blamed for embroidery. We shall begin closer to the velvet itself. Accordingly, Mrs. Tate and her niece, the early morning cleaners, were invited to sit beneath the benevolent glare of the station's fly-spotted lamps. Mrs. Tate, stout, practical, and given to smoothing her apron whether she wore one or not, was emphatic. Arms were there, Inspector, plain as nose. Niece here saw 'em the same as me. The niece, a pale young woman with hair that looked determined to leave her company, nodded solemnly. Round shape, a bit yellowy with red, sort of cheerful. And did either of you notice anyone else in the building that— Morning? Purbright asked. No one but ourselves, Mrs. Tate declared, though— she paused, arranging her words like ironmongery on a shelf. Though there was a smell, not our polish, something sweeter, like them soap folk bring back from foreign. Purbright glanced briefly at Love, whose notes already bore the word violets in an uncertain pencil. And the residue? The inspector prompted softly. A dust, perhaps? Mrs. Tate frowned. Could have been. Along the skirting, you mean? I thought it was from the stage paint, but then I said to myself, it's not the season for pantomimes. After sending the women away with thanks and a careful note to return their statements in triplicate, Purbright sat back. Lavender, love, and a careful hand with needlework. Not the calling cards of exuberant youth. More the refinement of someone who wishes to take, but without appearing vulgar. Love, still bent over his notes, looked up. "Then who, sir?" Purbright smiled faintly. "That, Sergeant, is precisely what they will begin to tell us themselves. In their anxieties, in their eagerness to deflect, we shall let them speak." The following morning provided him with ample material. Councillor Ada Crick, always ready to consider herself the town's cultural custodian, demanded an audience with the inspector. She arrived in a brimmed hat that took up most of his office doorway. "Inspector," she began, with the firmness of one who often finished other people's sentences, "I must insist that you consider this theft not merely a matter of municipal property, but of civic dignity. If the arms are not restored, Flaxborough will become a laughing-stock." "A laughing-stock?" Purbright inclined his head gravely. "Laughter is indeed difficult to suppress once it finds an excuse, councillor." "Exactly," she snapped. "Therefore, you will surely agree that all avenues must be pursued. I cannot say who might have the audacity to interfere with borough property, but it would not surprise me in the least if certain shopkeepers, who shall remain nameless for now, were behind it. Out of spite, Inspector, spite against the council." Purbright's expression remained politely receptive. "Shopkeepers can be inventive people," he said mildly. "Do you recall which of them has recently quarrelled with the council?" Councillor Crick hesitated, then coloured faintly. "Well, there was the matter of closing hours, and the matter of window displays during Lent, and—" She paused, conscious that spite seemed to be cueing rather too conveniently at her suggestion. "In any case, I trust you to keep these matters discreet." Her departure left a faint odour of starch in the room. Love, entering after she had gone, raised his eyebrows. "That's one suspect who volunteered, then." "Volunteered indeed," Purbright murmured. "When people present suspicions so freely, it is often themselves they are trying to protect." As if summoned by irony, Mr. Trevor Birtle appeared later that day, agitated and perspiring beneath the weight of his responsibility. He produced a sheaf of papers, the original order, the installation receipts, and a small ledger. "I have come to put matters straight, Inspector," he declared. "The crest was affixed securely under my supervision. I cannot be held accountable for what vandals have since accomplished. If this is not made clear, my firm's reputation will suffer gravely." Purbright leafed through the papers with the indifference of a man browsing a menu at a foreign café. "Quite so, Mr. Birtle. Your reputation is naturally a delicate garment." He looked up gently. "And yet, who besides yourself handled the crest during the installation?" Birtle hesitated, swallowed, then said, "One of my men, Judkins. Reliable fellow. Not over-bright, but he would hardly— well, he wouldn't know a crest from a cushion." "Sometimes," Purbright said, "not knowing is a form of innocence. Would Judkins, for instance, have known the value of copper over brass?" Birtle blinked rapidly, as though confronted by a foreign language. I couldn't say." "Then perhaps we should," Purbright said softly. "I would like to speak with him." By day's end, Flaxborough was bristling with its own investigation. The Empire Café had formed a sort of unofficial committee, which sat daily by the bun cabinet and apportioned blame in neat slices. Mrs. Plackett's salon thrummed with theories that tangled more efficiently than hair. And down at the market square, tradesmen exchanged knowing winks and muttered darkly about council mismanagement, as if the crest had walked away of its own accord in protest. Purbright, watching this quiet ferment from his office window, permitted himself the faintest smile. The missing crest had become a mirror in which every citizen glimpsed their own grievances. It would not be long before someone, in their eagerness to divert suspicion or sharpen a rival's discomfort, spoke rather more freely than was wise. For the moment he allowed Flaxborough its sport. A deficiency, he had once remarked, was a more efficient truth-teller than an excess. And in this deficiency, he felt, the town was already beginning to confess more than it realised. By the third morning, the missing crest had settled in Flaxborough's imagination like an unwelcome lodger who refused to pay his keep. People adjusted their routines slightly, as though walking past the town hall required more elaborate glances and whispered commentary. The curtains themselves had become a curiosity. Those who had no reason to step inside made excuses to do so, simply to see the pale scar at their crown. The Empire Café buzzed with new confidence. Mr. Judkins, one of Birtle's delivery men, was declared by at least 3 separate factions to be the obvious culprit. He was not known to be dishonest, but his limited capacity for defending himself was seen as a recommendation for guilt. Mrs. Birtwistle, finding her reputation at stake after her sighting of midnight men in bowler hats had failed to prosper, now insisted she had seen Judkins loitering near the assembly room the evening of the installation. When challenged that she had earlier described 2 figures, she sniffed and declared that 2 was only a figure of speech. At Mrs. Plackett's salon, Judkins' alleged motives grew like ivy. He has always been resentful of Mr. Birtle, poor pay and long hours, one client insisted, while another contributed that Judkins had a fondness for public houses in which certain collectors might easily persuade him to part with an embroidered crest. Even Mrs. Plackett, who was normally content to watch gossip comb itself into knots, admitted that Judkins' face was the sort that could conceal anything, if only he knew what it was. Purbright, who never discouraged rumours unless they risked bloodshed, allowed these theories to ferment while he arranged a meeting with the accused himself. Judkins appeared at the police station late in the afternoon, his cap clutched in his hands that were large, raw, and suggestive of furniture lifting rather than nimble theft. He was a man in his early 30s with a slow, apologetic smile that arrived before his words did. "Inspector," he said, half bowing, "they say you want me." "Not in any alarming sense, Mr. Judkins," Purbright replied, gesturing towards a chair. "We merely wish to hear about your work on the curtains. You were present when the crest was fixed." "Yes, sir. Mr. Birtle did most of the talking. I held things, fetched screws, that sort." "And you noticed nothing unusual?" Judkins hesitated, scratching his chin. "Only Mr. Birtle was in a right hurry, sir. I wanted it finished before 9 sharp. The said councillors were breathing down his neck, but then again, he's always like that when money's near." Love, seated beside Purbright, asked quickly, "Did you go back into the hall after finishing?" "No, Sergeant. Straight home. I had supper with my mum. She'll tell you we had a trip." The statement, while unlikely to inspire envy, carried a ring of honesty too plain to ignore. Purbright thanked him and let him go, advising that he not trouble himself with the town's opinion. Judkins left with the air of a man who was resigned to being blamed for everything from mislaid umbrellas to rising damp. That evening, Purbright and Love took a quiet walk through the marketplace. The lamps shone with their customary dimness, producing a light more apologetic than illuminating. Across the square, the town hall loomed with its new velvet burdens, windows dark, its facade faintly resentful of the fuss. "Sir," Love said hesitantly, "do you think Judkins could have done it after all? He had the chance, and people seem, well, certain." Purbright's reply was almost amused. "Certainty, Sergeant, is often a polite disguise for ignorance. People like their mysteries solved before supper. It makes indigestion less of a risk." He paused, then added, "No, our thief had a steadier hand than Judkins could boast. Whoever removed that crest valued discretion more than haste. They worked with lavender on their fingers." Love gave a slight frown. "That sounds like a lady, sir." "Not necessarily, but it does sound like someone who takes pains to appear civilized. In Flaxborough, the more civilized the citizens, the more thoroughly we must check their cupboards." The following day brought the first of what the townsfolk later came to call the little dramas of the curtain affair. At the weekly meeting of the Borough Council, Councillor Crick rose to her feet in the assembly room and launched into a denunciation of municipal laxity. She delivered her rebuke with such fervour that she failed to notice until too late the position of her chair. It had been nudged, by accident or perhaps by providence, an inch too far from the table. With solemn inevitability, as she attempted to sit, she descended firmly to the polished floorboards. The noise rang through the hall like a pistol shot. Several councillors gasped. Others suppressed smiles of long practice. Councillor Crick, red as the velvet behind her, struggled to her feet while the curtains loomed above like a witness refusing to intervene. By evening, the town's gossip had seized upon the fall with more enthusiasm than the missing crest. "It's a warning," declared one shopkeeper darkly, "to those who dig too close." Another suggested that the chair had been shifted deliberately as part of some feud. A third, more fanciful, whispered that the absence of the borough arms had upset the balance of the assembly room, leading to supernatural interference. Purbright, listening to the accounts reported second-hand to him, merely observed, "In Flaxborough, nothing provokes the imagination like a woman on the floor. Still, the counsellor's accident may yet serve us. People will talk more freely now, eager to attach meaning. Indeed, by the following day, fresh rumours surfaced that Counsellor Crick herself had arranged for the crest to be removed, perhaps to manufacture a scandal that would place her at the centre of local drama. The logic was feeble but satisfying. She had long considered herself the guardian of culture, and what better way to prove it than by presiding over its apparent loss? Purbright neither endorsed nor dismissed the theory. Instead, he asked Sergeant Love to compile a list of those with keys to the assembly room besides Mr. Beasley. It was discovered that 2 other sets were in circulation, one with the mayor's office, the other with Counsellor Crick herself. This detail, while innocent enough in theory, planted a seed of interest in Purbright's mind. Keys, he remarked, have a curious habit of turning up in pockets other than their owners. It is a small freedom people allow themselves to borrow access without announcing it. Let us remember that. That evening a discreet note reached the inspector's desk from the caretaker Beasley. It reported that during his nightly round he had noticed something odd in the assembly room. A faint scraping sound had echoed from behind the curtains, though no one was present. When he examined the stage, he found nothing, except a small fragment of thread, golden in hue, caught upon a splinter of the woodwork. Purbright turned the fragment in his fingers, thoughtful. It was finer than anything used in Birtle's upholstery work, more delicate, more deliberate. Gold thread, he murmured. That is no tradesman's material. That belongs to someone with a taste for embellishment. He slipped the thread into an envelope and set it aside, his expression betraying no triumph, only patience. The town thinks it has found its culprit in poor Judkins, he said quietly. But this thread tells us otherwise. Now we must see who in Flaxborough is missing such finery from their possessions, or who has taken pains to explain it away. The golden thread lay on Purbright's desk the next morning, an unimpressive sliver to the eye yet weighty in implication. In Flaxborough, a detail so trifling would be dismissed by most as lint. But Purbright had come to expect that in small towns, it was the overlooked trifles that whispered the loudest. He turned the envelope between his fingers as Sergeant Love entered, with the morning's crop of speculation harvested from the cafes and hairdressers. "They're quite set on Judkins now, sir," Love reported. "Mrs. Plackett says his mother was seen buying extra polish last week, and she thinks it must have been to cover up scorch marks from burning the crest. And Mr. Roper says he saw Judkins carrying a parcel under his arm the other day. Long parcel, wrapped in paper." Purbright smiled faintly. "In Flaxbury, Sergeant, parcels are always guilty until proven innocent." He gestured to the envelope. "This, however, does not belong to Judkins. He would not know the difference between gold thread and kite string, and it is too fine for upholstery. Where do we find such embroidery in our little town?" Love thought for a moment. "The drapery shop. Mrs. Clarabot keeps all manner of clothes." "Too pedestrian," Purbright murmured. "This is a thread for show, not for sale. It will belong to someone who considers displaying a duty." He paused, then looked up. "Let us pay a call on Counsellor Crick. She is fond of embellishments, on garments, on speeches, on herself." The counsellor received them in her drawing-room, a space that declared its owner's zeal for culture while quietly betraying its limitations. Watercolours of uncertain subjects adorned the walls, while embroidered cushions bore mottos of such piety that their stitchery seemed an act of apology. "Inspector, Sergeant," she said briskly, adjusting her brooch. "If you are here to report progress, I hope it is significant. The town grows restless." Purbright inclined his head politely. "Restlessness is a sign of vigour, Counsellor. But yes, there has been a small discovery. A thread of gold found near the stage." He allowed the words to hang as if waiting for her reaction. Counsellor Crick blinked, then composed herself. "Gold? That suggests something theatrical. Perhaps a costume piece from the Operatic Society." "Perhaps," Purbright said mildly, "though the Operatic Society has not yet rehearsed those curtains. May I inquire, Counsellor, whether you possess any garments that employ such thread?" She gave a short laugh. "Inspector, I am not in the habit of parading myself like a music-hall singer. My wardrobe is respectable." "Respectability," Purbright murmured, "sometimes uses gilded edges." "And your evening gowns?" Her lips tightened. "A few, yes. But I do not care to have my private attire inventoried by the police." Purbright did not press. He had learned that silence was more persuasive than argument. After a moment she shifted in her chair, smoothing her skirt. If you are suggesting I had anything to do with this nonsense, Inspector, then I must protest most vigorously. I suggest nothing, Purbright said calmly, but I observe that you, along with the mayor, possess a key to the assembly room. The curtains are safest when locked, but keys can be persuasive companions. Her face flushed, though whether from indignation or something closer to discomfort was difficult to measure. I have used that key only for council duties. To imply otherwise is offensive. Purbright rose politely. Offence, councillor, is often a companion of inquiry. Thank you for your time. Outside the lane, Love looked puzzled. She was rattled, sir, but if she did it, why? What use would she have for the arms? Use is a modern obsession, Love, Purbright replied. In Flaxborough, people do things not from use, but from a mixture of habit, spite, and the desire to be noticed. Later that day, Purbright called Mayor Biddlecombe. The mayor's office smelled faintly of pipe smoke and neglected paperwork. He greeted them with genial anxiety. Inspector, I trust you are narrowing things down. The council fears ridicule. Purbright seated himself, his hat resting neatly on his knee. I understand you also possess a key to the assembly room. Of course. Yes, though I seldom use it. Beasley is generally sufficient. And yet keys have a way of being more sociable than their owners, Purbright remarked. May we inquire where yours is kept? The mayor fumbled at his waistcoat. In my drawer here. Yes. He pulled it open, revealing a modest assortment of papers and pencils. Always here. He rummaged, frowned, and rummaged again. His expression stiffened. That's odd. Must have mislaid it. Purbright's gaze remained steady. Keys do enjoy excursions. He leaned forward slightly. When did you last require it? Oh, weeks ago, Biddlecombe muttered, his joviality leaking away. I've no need for it, truly. Councillor Crick is the one who insists on late inspections. It was not an accusation, but it sounded perilously like one. Purbright rose gently, leaving the mayor to his drawer. That evening brought the second little drama. During a rehearsal of the Operatic Society, as the cast warmed their voices on stage, the curtains were drawn to half-mast. An audible gasp erupted from the gallery. Someone had pinned, in the pale oval where the crest had once been, a crude sketch on paper of the borough arms, 3 eels rampant, a barley sheaf couchant. Except the eels were replaced by 3 sausages, and the motto beneath had been altered to read Per Stomachum Vincimus. The discovery caused uproar. The singers, who had rehearsed with more enthusiasm than skill, clustered indignantly around the sketch. Councillor Crick, present as patroness, turned purple with outrage. An obscenity, she cried. A calculated insult to our heritage. By morning, the town was ablaze with laughter. The parody arms were described in detail by every gossip, each version more elaborate than the last. Shop windows were rumoured to display copies, though no one admitted to seeing them firsthand. Purbright, summoned to inspect the sketch, studied it without mirth. This, he remarked, is not the work of someone who stole the crest. It is the work of someone who wishes to draw attention away from the thief. Then it's a decoy, sir? Love asked. Perhaps. Or perhaps an attempt to make the matter appear no more than a prank, and once a crime is thought comic, the town ceases to take it seriously. He folded the paper and pocketed it. Our thief is nervous. They are trying to hide among laughter, which means they fear discovery. As they left the assembly room, Purbright glanced back once more at the heavy curtains. They hung with perfect gravity, their velvet folds concealing stage and wall alike, while above them the pale oval seemed almost to glow in the light of morning. To most, it was an absence, an embarrassment, a loss. To Purbright it was a window through which someone's quiet ambition or malice had already slipped, and that window, he felt, was beginning to narrow. The parody crest lingered in the town's imagination longer than its ink deserved. By midweek, children had drawn their own versions in school jotters, and at least one baker in the marketplace had produced sausage-shaped loaves that customers insisted upon calling rampant. The humour pleased some, but for the borough council it was intolerable. Councillor Crick stormed through the high street, her umbrella a weapon of dignity denouncing filthy-minded pranksters. Mayor Biddlecombe, though outwardly chuckling at the joke to seem broad-minded, confided to anyone patient enough that standards were slipping, and that perhaps the crest should never have been commissioned in the first place. Purbright, however, was more interested in who stood to gain from the diversion. The sketch had not materialised out of schoolboy mischief alone. It was pinned carefully, square in the place where the real crest had been unstitched. That placement required not only knowledge of the building's access, but also a deliberate choice to mock the absence directly. A decoy, as he had told Love, but also a message. That afternoon, Sergeant Love returned from discreet inquiries among the drapery shops. He carried a small paper packet which he laid before Purbright as a contribution to the altar plate. "I checked with Mrs. Clarabot, sir, and with 2 others. None of them stocks thread as fine as the piece you found. But Mrs. Clarabot says she remembers selling a spool of gold to a lady in late spring. Special order. She couldn't quite place the face, but she said the woman had a counsellor's air." Purbright tapped the packet lightly. "A counsellor's air, Love, is rarely mistaken. People breathe authority like dust. They cannot shake it off." He stood, stretching mildly, and reached for his hat. "Let us walk. A thread may yet lead us to a seam." They set out along the marketplace where afternoon shoppers huddled against a damp breeze. The Empire Cafe windows steamed with gossip, while Mrs. Plackett's salon emitted its customary scent of hair-setting lotions and insinuation. Purbright glanced at these temples of local truth, content to let their worshippers mutter without interruption. Instead, he guided Love towards the house of Mrs. Arabella Kemp, a widow of some standing who served on various committees and was known for her fondness of embroidery. Mrs. Kemp greeted them at her doorway in a gown of green silk, her face bright with the sort of hospitality that thrives on being observed. "Inspector, Sergeant, do come in. You must excuse the clutter. My sewing circle met yesterday, and they do leave threads behind." The drawing-room was indeed a nest of cloths, cushions and silks. On a side table lay a half-finished tapestry glinting faintly with gold. Purbright bent politely over it. "A beautiful hand, Mrs. Kemp. Your needle is enviably steady," she beamed. "One must keep busy, Inspector. Widowhood leaves long evenings. And your circle? Do they favour such fine materials?" "Oh, some. I myself prefer them. A lady should not do her stitchwork, don't you think?" Purbright nodded. "Quite. Did you happen, Mrs. Kemp, to attend the unveiling of the new curtains?" Her expression flickered, though only briefly. "I did not. These affairs tend to be crowded with counsellors and tradesmen. I prefer a quieter life. Yet you heard of the missing crest?" "Who? Hasn't?" She laughed. "The whole town talks of nothing else. Even my charwoman speculates. She says it was taken by Methodists to be burned as idolatry." The inspector smiled faintly. "And do you yourself speculate?" "I?" She lifted her eyebrows. "Number the wang stitch. I leave speculating to others." When they left, Love whispered, "That tapestry, sir, the gold was the same shade." "Indeed," Purbright replied. "But Mrs. Kemp is not careless. If she is guilty, she will not flaunt the evidence in plain sight. People who value appearances are paradoxically reckless, but never foolish." The next morning brought a visit from Beasley, the caretaker. He shuffled into Purbright's office carrying a broom wrapped in brown paper. "Beg pardon, Inspector, but I thought you'd like to see this. Found it behind the stage this morning." Inside the paper, nestled among bristles, was a scrap of cloth no larger than a coin. It bore unmistakably a portion of embroidery, a red curve edged with gold like the corner of a shield. "Ah," Purbright said softly. "The arms are shedding their skin." Beasley scratched his head. "Looks like someone tried to sweep it up. Only the broom caught it." Purbright held the fragment to the light. "Whoever removed the crest was thorough, but not immaculate. They left crumbs behind." Love leaned closer. "So the whole crest hasn't been destroyed?" "Not yet. Pieces persist. People who steal symbols often hesitate before deciding their fate. It is easier to take than to dispose of. We must find out where the rest lies." That evening, Flaxborough suffered its second set-piece scandal. At the annual lecture of the Historical Society, held predictably in the assembly room, a lantern slide projector malfunctioned. Instead of displaying medieval manuscripts, the lens abruptly cast an image of the parody crest, the sausages rampant upon the great curtains. Gasps turned to muffled laughter. The lecturer, crimson-faced, fumbled to remove the slide, but not before the image had burned itself into every eye. By dawn, it was clear someone had deliberately tampered with the slides. The Society's secretary swore she had left them in a locked cabinet. Yet the parody had infiltrated the collection, neatly numbered and placed where it could not fail to appear. Purbright inspected the projector the next day. "This," he said to Love, "is the work of the same hand. Again, a joke to make the matter appear frivolous, but a joke performed with access, with calm preparation. Not the act of rowdy students. More the art of a mind that enjoys control," Love frowned. "So we can rule out Judkins entirely." "Judkins has been ruled out by his triple supper since the beginning," Purbright replied dryly. "But the town enjoys his guilt too much to let it go. Meanwhile, our true culprit grows anxious. They try too hard to dress up as thieves in comedy." He folded his hands thoughtfully. "Let us not chase the laughter. Let us follow the silence. Somewhere in Flaxborough there is someone who does not laugh at all." That evening in the Empire Café, as women bent over teacups to dissect the projector scandal, Purbright sat unobtrusively at a corner table. He watched faces. Most twinkled with mischief, others swelled with indignation. But one, seated apart, looked drawn, pale and unsmiling. Mrs. Kemp, her embroidery bag at her side, stirred her tea without drinking it, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the steamed window. Purbright's gaze lingered a moment longer. A woman who stitched with gold, who avoided the unveiling, who possessed poise enough to maintain her mask, yet whose silence, when the town roared with laughter, spoke like a missing note. Inspector Purbright had the sort of patience that towns mistake for slowness. He knew that gossip, like yeast, worked best when left alone to rise, and so, after the projector scandal, he resisted the urge to pursue witnesses too quickly. Instead, he allowed the air of farce to thicken about the town, confident that in the corners where laughter failed, the truth would make itself visible. Mrs. Kemp's silence in the cafe had not gone unnoticed. She had sat amidst the swirl of cackling women, her spoon moving listlessly, her eyes fixed on something unseeable. Purbright recalled it clearly the following morning as he walked with Sergeant Love toward the quieter end of town, where Mrs. Kemp's villa stood half proud and half tired behind iron railings in need of paint. The maid admitted them with an air of curiosity barely disguised as formality. Mrs. Kemp herself appeared shortly after, her green silk replaced by a more sombre grey. She carried an embroidery hoop, though the cloth within it bore only a plain outline. Inspector, Sergeant. What a surprise. "You have caught me at my morning occupation," she smiled faintly. Purbright's gaze rested on the empty design. "An occupation more contemplative than industrious, I see." Mrs. Kemp gave a small laugh. "One must think before one stitches." He accepted the offered chair and looked around the room. The furnishings had the polite dignity of widowhood, lace antimacassars, polished wood, and photographs of solemn gentlemen whose whiskers did not survive into the present century. Yet on the mantel, discreetly set back, Purbright noticed a narrow wooden box with a sliding lid. From its edge protruded the tail of a gold thread. Their conversation meandered with courtesy. Purbright inquired about her circle of friends, her involvement in charitable works, and her views on the town's present hysteria. She answered with composure, though occasionally her fingers strayed to the hoop as if wishing to stitch away the questions. When Purbright rose to take his leave, his eyes flicked once more to the wooden box. He did not mention it. Outside, on the villa's neat gravel path, Love spoke in low urgency. "Did you see, sir? The thread box?" "I did." "Why didn't you ask?" Purbright adjusted his hat. "Because people reveal themselves more when they believe they are unseen. If Mrs. Kemp is our embroiderer of arms, she will take measures to guard, or to dispose of, the remainder. We must watch to see what those measures are." 2 evenings later, the second set-piece comedy occurred, though, to those involved, it was anything but comic. The operatic society gathered once more in the assembly room. They were midway through a chorus when one of the curtains gave an abrupt jerk, the draw-cord slipping in its pulley. Half the velvet collapsed forward, nearly sweeping 2 altos into the orchestra pit. The stage manager swore, the singers squealed, and Councillor Crick, once again present, declared that sabotage was plainly afoot. By morning, the town enjoyed a new feast of rumours. Some claimed Judkins had tampered with the cords in revenge for his good name. Others hinted at trade union agitation. But the more malicious declared it was the handiwork of Mrs. Kemp herself, who, according to one salon whisper, coveted influence in the historical society and wished to demonstrate her power by unbalancing the town's dignity. Purbright heard these theories without comment. He examined the pulley cord himself, noting a small fray at the point of slip. Threads had been cut, not worn. And lodged in the pulley wheel was a faint smear of wax, faintly scented, lavender, unmistakably. That afternoon, he returned to Mrs. Kemp's villa, this time without preamble. The maid's curiosity was more pronounced now, her eyes flicking with eagerness as she led him in. Mrs. Kemp rose from her chair, embroidery still in hand. "Inspector again," she said. "You're persistent." "Persistence is sometimes mistaken for duty, Mrs. Kemp. May I sit?" She gestured with resignation. The hoop trembled faintly in her hands. Purbright studied her face, calm yet drawn taut around the mouth. "You were not at the rehearsal last night," he said gently. "Number, I do not care for amateur opera." Yet someone tampered with the curtain cords. They left lavender wax behind. For a heartbeat she was still, then she smiled too brightly. "Inspector, I use lavender polish in this very room. If you choose to find me guilty of theatre mischief because I prefer my parlour to smell pleasant, then I must laugh." Purbright inclined his head, his voice mild. No one laughs so readily when they are truly amused. "Mrs. Kemp, if I may advise, Flaxborough is a town that notices who laughs and who does not, and at the Historical Society lecture you were very quiet." Her eyes dropped to her embroidery. "Some jokes are not to my taste," he rose. "Nor to mine, madam, but the thief, I suspect, is not joking at all." Outside again, Love walked silently before finally speaking. "She's hiding something, sir. You're certain?" "I am certain of her silence, Love, and silence in Flaxborough is never innocent." The days that followed drew the town into further knots of rumour. Some swore the crest was already overseas, sold to a collector of heraldry in Belgium. Others insisted it lay hidden in a laundry basket, awaiting smuggling to Hull. Meanwhile, Mrs. Kemp went about her duties with unfailing politeness, though those who observed closely said she'd grown thinner, her smile more brittle. On the 5th night after the curtain cord fiasco, Beasley, the caretaker, sent word that a light had been glimpsed in the assembly room after closing. When he entered, nothing was amiss, except for one small object left on the stage. It was a thimble, silver, and engraved with the initials AK. Purbright examined it in his office the next morning. Love could not suppress a satisfied breath. "Arabella Kemp, sir?" "Indeed," Purbright said quietly. "But evidence, Sergeant, is only half the story. The other half is motive. Why should a woman of means and repute risk disgrace for a crest?" Love frowned. "Spite? Pride? Or perhaps she wanted attention?" Purbright's eyes settled on the golden thread still sealed in its envelope. "In Flaxborough, people do not steal for riches. They steal for meanings. Mrs. Kemp's reasons, I think, will not be counted in pounds, but in years. Something long remembered, perhaps. Something to be avenged." He placed the thimble beside the fragment of embroidery and folded his hands. "The town will continue to gossip. But we, Love, must listen to what they cannot imagine. That is where the truth will sit, quietly, and almost certainly in a parlour filled with thread." The silver thimble with its neat initials lay on Purbright's desk like a modest confession. Sergeant Love, still flushed with satisfaction from their find, regarded it as a decisive clue. "It's her, sir. It must be. Nobody else in town has a thimble with her initials. She practically signed the scene of the crime." Purbright examined the object without triumph. "People do not usually sign their crimes, Love. Unless, of course, they wish for them to be noticed. Then why leave it behind? That is an interesting question." Purbright placed the thimble beside the golden thread and the fragment of crest. "If Mrs. Kemp is guilty, she is either careless or deliberate. I incline towards deliberate. She's too meticulous to mislay what belongs so intimately to her craft. No, she means us to know something, but not quite everything." Love frowned, frustrated. "She's leading us a merry dance. On the contrary, she is leading us exactly where she intends. The trick, Sergeant, is to notice where she does not want to be seen." Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Beasley, the caretaker, once again. He shuffled in his air of permanent apology. "Beg pardon, Inspector, but I thought you'd best hear this. Mrs. Kemp's maid was in the hall just now, asking after the keys. Said her mistress had mislaid hers and wanted to be sure none had turned up." Purbright's brows lifted a fraction. How thoughtful of her, and how odd that she should lose two things of such consequence in such a short space of time. Love was less subtle. "She's covering her tracks, sir." "Perhaps." Purbright leaned back in his chair. "Or maybe she is lying." When people begin to claim misplacement, it is often an attempt to prepare an alibi. A missing key, a missing thimble, they may both be intended to prove absence where presence is suspected. Later that day, Purbright requested a discreet word with the mayor. Biddlecombe received him in his usual haze of pipe smoke and confusion. When the inspector inquired about Mrs. Kemp, the mayor's geniality faltered. Arabella? Oh, she's been a fixture of the town since before the war. Ran committees, raised funds, and scolded councillors into doing their duty. Formidable woman, though always polite about it. She lost her husband in 43, you know. Never remarried. Devoted herself to causes. Some say she overreaches. Overreaches in what way? Well, the mayor fidgeted with his pipe. She once proposed her late husband's name be given to the new library wing. Council declined. She never quite forgave it. Always thought her family deserved recognition. I shouldn't be surprised if she's harboured a grievance ever since. Purbright listened in silence. So Mrs. Kemp has an appetite for commemoration, and a distaste for being ignored. That's about it? The mayor shifted, uneasy. You don't really think she took the arms, do you? Arabella's proud, yes, but a thief? It doesn't... Purbright rose, his politeness cutting short the mayor's dithering. Pride, Mr. Mayor, is a more powerful thief than poverty. Good day. That evening, Purbright and Love took a walk along the river, where the weedy banks smelled of mud and faint industry. Purbright's voice was low and reflective. The crest is not gold or jewels, Love. It has no market value. Whoever stole it wanted more than material profit. They wanted attention, remembrance, or to wound pride. And Mrs. Kemp fits all three, Love said. She does. But fitting is not the same as fastening. The following morning, a new incident brought matters to a sharper edge. A letter arrived at the council offices written in a neat old-fashioned hand. It was addressed to the mayor and signed only with the initials AK inside was a short message. The crest will not return until the town learns to honour those it forgets. The mayor, flustered and appalled, carried the letter at once to Purbright. This is extortion, Inspector. Sentimental extortion. Purbright read the message carefully. The paper was heavy, the ink black, the loops of the script steady. This is not extortion, Mr. Mayor. There is no demand for money. It is a declaration. The writer is not threatening. They are instructing. Love leaned over his shoulder. So it is, Mrs. Kemp, she's given herself away. Or someone has given her away on her behalf, Purbright murmured. AK could stand for Arabella Kemp, yes, but it might also be intended to make us believe so. There are other surnames in Flaxborough with K. We must not allow the obvious to become the only. Nevertheless, suspicion in the town fastened itself firmly to Mrs. Kemp. At the Empire Café, women whispered that she had turned eccentric from widowhood, and that embroidery had become her obsession to unhealthy ends. At Mrs. Plackett's salon, it was even suggested she had stitched the crest into her bedsheets as a private monument to her lost husband. Purbright, hearing these absurdities second-hand, allowed himself the faintest of smiles. People's fantasies, he told Love, are always more elaborate than the truth, but sometimes the direction of their fancy points us toward what lies beneath. That afternoon, Purbright received another visitor, Mr. Birtle, the upholsterer. He was nervous, sweating slightly despite the cool air. Inspector, I hesitate to mention it, but I thought it my duty. Mrs. Kemp commissioned work from me once, some years ago. Cushions with her initials embroidered in gold. Very particular about it, she was. When I saw that fragment you found, I thought of her at once. Purbright regarded him mildly. You're helpful, Mr. Birtle, though perhaps a little too eager to direct attention. Tell me, did she pay her bill? Birtle shifted uncomfortably. Eventually. Ah, Purbright said. Then perhaps your memory is gilded by resentment. Thank you all the same. When Birtle had gone, Love looked to Purbright expectantly. That confirms it, surely. Purbright shook his head. It confirms only that Mr. Birtle dislikes unpaid invoices. But combined with the letter, with the thimble, with the lavender wax, it forms a picture. Incomplete, yes, but suggestive. We must not be in a hurry. Our thief is still moving, still staging diversions. We shall wait until the performance begins to overrun. And indeed, that very night, there was another ripple. Beasley again pointed a light at the assembly room. When he entered, nothing was disturbed, but on the stage lay a folded handkerchief embroidered with the same initials, a K, and inside it, a second scrap of the missing crest. Purbright held it in his hands later, his expression unreadable. "The thief has begun to feed us crumbs, Sergeant. That means they wish us to follow. The question is, where does the trail lead? To the rest of the crest, or to a trap?" Love swallowed, his excitement barely contained. "So we're close now." "Close, yes," Purbright agreed, "but not yet certain. And certainty, Love, is the one luxury we cannot afford until the curtains close." The folded handkerchief embroidered with AK and concealing a fragment of the missing crest lay in Purbright's office as if waiting for applause. Sergeant Love could scarcely contain his conviction. "She's taunting us now, sir, leaving pieces behind with her own initials. What else can it mean?" Purbright leaned back, studying the delicate stitching. "It means," he said evenly, "that someone very much wants us to look only in one direction. A performance, Sergeant, requires the audience's eyes to be held while the trick is done elsewhere. The initials may be a spotlight. We must ask ourselves, what is happening behind the curtain while we are made to stare at it?" The town, however, had no such reservations. By morning, the cafe gossip, the hairdressers, and even the butcher's queue were united in their certainty. Mrs. Arabella Kemp was guilty. People recalled with sudden clarity her strange remarks at church socials, her habit of keeping to herself, her fondness for embroidery, and above all her silence when others laughed at the parody arms. Every remembered detail was twisted now into evidence. Mrs. Kemp herself did not withdraw from public view, though she appeared thinner, her face sharper around the eyes. She continued to attend committee meetings, still impeccably polite, though her greetings were met with coolness. At one such gathering at Town Hall, Purbright noticed her fingers tremble slightly as she adjusted her papers. When she lifted her head, however, her composure returned. After the meeting, Purbright approached her. "You have been much spoken of, Mrs. Kemp." She met his gaze with a tight smile. "I am aware, Inspector, it is not pleasant to be the subject of small minds. You might quiet them by denying what they believe. I should not waste my breath on that. The more one denies, the more they are convinced. Flaxborough is like a cushion. Press one corner and it bulges somewhere else." Her words struck him with their precision. A woman who thought in images of cloth, thread, and cushions, her metaphors betrayed her as surely as her silks did. That night brought a further disturbance. During another rehearsal of the Operatic Society, as the curtain was drawn, a bundle fell from the top pelmet to the stage. Singers screamed, counsellors scrambled, and when the object was unwrapped, it proved to be not the missing crest but a collection of old council papers tied with ribbon. Their dates went back 20 years, and included minutes from a meeting in which the proposal to name the new library wing after Mrs. Kemp's late husband had been rejected. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. "It's her revenge," Love said firmly when the papers were brought to the station. "She's reminding them of the slight. First the crest, now this. She wants the town to suffer its past refusals." Purbright examined the bundle without haste. The knot on the ribbon was precise, neat, the same sort of knot he had seen on Mrs. Kemp's embroidery frame. Yet he frowned. "If she wished revenge, Love, why return us to a forgotten council meeting? Most of the town barely recalls yesterday's minutes, let alone those of 20 years ago. No, this is not revenge. This is theatre. She, or someone, wants us to believe there is a grand motive. But in truth the motive may be much smaller, pettier, and pettiness is harder to spot when wrapped in solemn paper." The town's humour faltered now. Laughter over sausages rampant gave way to unease. Committees were tense, meetings restless. People began locking cupboards that had never before required locks. Mrs. Kemp endured cool stares in public, but she neither fled nor fought back. Her stillness began to look, to those less patient than Purbright, like guilt itself. On the third evening after the bundle's discovery, Beasley reported once more a sound in the assembly room at night. This time, Purbright accompanied him. Together they entered the dark hall, their footsteps echoing faintly. The curtains loomed heavy and silent, their pale oval still vacant. Purbright moved slowly along the stage, his lamp sweeping across the boards. At the far corner, near the trapdoor to the storage cellar, something gleamed. It was another scrap of fabric, larger this time. When unfolded, it revealed part of the crest itself, the sheaf of barley, intact and shining faintly under gold thread. Whoever had placed it there had done so with deliberate care. It had not been dropped, but displayed. Love's excitement was immediate. "It's her again, sir. She's feeding us the whole thing piece by piece. A performance, like you said." Purbright's voice was quiet. "Yes, but whose performance, and to what end? Consider, Sergeant. Why return parts at all? Why not keep the crest hidden forever? The longer it is missing, the greater the town's unease, unless the thief does not want absence but attention, attention for themselves or attention turned away from another." They returned to the station, where Purbright placed the sheaf fragment beside the earlier scraps. The crest was reassembling itself in his office, each piece a silent clue. He sat for a long time, his face unreadable, before speaking. "We must watch Mrs. Kemp more closely, not confront her. Watch. If she is guilty, she will lead us to the rest. If she is not, someone else will use her shadow as cover." The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 nights later, Sergeant Love, stationed discreetly near Mrs. Kemp's villa, observed her leaving just after 9 carrying a small parcel wrapped in cloth. She walked briskly through the lamplit streets until she reached the town hall. Producing a key, she slipped inside. Love followed at a cautious distance and found her in the assembly room, standing before the curtain with the parcel in her hands. Slowly she unwrapped it, revealing yet another section of the missing crest, the rampant eels. Her hands trembled as she raised the embroidery towards the pale oval above the stage. At that moment, Purbright stepped forward from the shadows. His voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. "You mean to return it, Mrs. Kemp?" She froze. The embroidery clutched to her chest. Her face, pale in the lamplight, showed neither guilt nor anger, but a kind of weary sorrow. "Inspector, I never meant to steal, only to keep safe what they did not deserve." Purbright regarded her steadily. "Safe, or remembered?" Her eyes glistened. "Remembered. They forgot my husband. They forgot his service, his sacrifice. They forget everything that does not concern their dinners and their gossip. I wanted them to feel the loss just once, to know how it is to be robbed of honour." There was silence in the great hall, the curtains heavy above them. Love shifted uneasily, his certainty shaken. Purbright's gaze, however, remained calm. "You took the crest not to destroy, but to stage a reminder." She bowed her head. "Yes, but then, it went further. The parody, the papers, the projector slides. I had nothing to do with those. Someone else. Someone mocking me, perhaps, or using me." Purbright's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then we have 2 hands at work, yours to take, another's to laugh. Which of the 2, I wonder, is more dangerous to Flaxborough?" Mrs. Kemp said nothing more. She sank into a chair, the embroidery lying limp in her lap. Purbright stood in silence, his expression unreadable, as if listening to the whisper of velvet folds above. Mrs. Kemp's weary confession lingered in the assembly room like the faint smell of lavender polish. Sergeant Love, restless with indignation, had wanted to march her directly to the station that night, but Purbright held his ground with quiet firmness. "Not yet, Sergeant. She admits to taking, yes, but the play we are watching has more than one actor. She has spoken truthfully enough to reveal that." They let her return home with the fragment of the crest still in her possession. Love grumbled about leniency, but Purbright merely remarked that some truths are coaxed better by trust than by handcuffs. Still, he arranged for Beasley, the caretaker, to keep an extra eye upon the assembly room and report every whisper of activity. By morning, the town had heard that Mrs. Kemp had been seen slipping into the hall at night. Rumour galloped with a vigour all its own. By noon, she was condemned outright in the cafes, and by the time the hairdressers closed, she had been declared insane in 3 separate versions of the tale. Purbright read these reports as one might study the weather, inevitable and not especially useful. "The louder the town shouts," he told Love, "the more I listen for the soft voices. It is among them that guilt tends to hide." That evening, Beasley brought him news. Someone had once again meddled with the lantern slide cabinet. A new slide, placed between the historical manuscripts, bore not a parody crest this time, but an image of Mrs. Kemp herself. It was an old photograph, sharp with studio seriousness, her youthful face framed by a stiff collar. Across the bottom, someone had scrawled in ink, "The Lady of the Arms." The revelation caused the Historical Society, gathered for another talk, to descend into chaos. Some gasped, some laughed nervously, and others denounced the cruelty. Mrs. Kemp, who had come despite her notoriety, turned white as plaster. She left the hall before lectures resumed. Later, in the quiet of his office, Purbright examined the slide. The photograph was genuine enough, the ink fresh. "This," he said softly, "is not Mrs. Kemp's doing. She is clever, but she is not vindictive. To mark herself in ridicule is the act of someone else, someone keen to turn suspicion into humiliation." Love leaned against the desk. "Then we're looking at two people. Mrs. Kemp took the crest for her reasons. Someone else, knowing or guessing what she had done, turned it into a joke. Maybe to expose her. Maybe to ruin her." Purbright inclined his head. "Exactly so. But which motive leads? Exposure or ruin? One reveals itself through comedy, the other through cruelty. I wonder which of our good citizens has such a sense of theatre." The next day Purbright called Mrs. Kemp again. He found her pale but defiant. "They mock me, Inspector. Whoever is behind these jests wishes me destroyed, not merely remembered. I never wanted such a spectacle. I only wanted them to feel as absent as I did." "Absence," Purbright murmured, "is powerful indeed. But tell me, Mrs. Kemp, who in this town would be most delighted in seeing you discredited?" Her eyes flickered briefly. "Mr. Birtle. That tradesman has resented me for years. I refused his bill once when he overcharged. He has never forgiven it." Purbright made no comment, though the thought was not new to him. He let the silence grow until she filled it. "And Councillor Crick," she added bitterly. "She has always seen me as a rival for influence. It would amuse her greatly to have me humbled." When Purbright left, he reflected aloud to Love. She names two. One resents money, the other resents power. Both are stronger motives than memory. That evening brought the third set-piece scandal, the most dramatic yet. During a public concert in the assembly room, with the curtains drawn proudly across the stage, the missing crest suddenly revealed itself. It had been stitched crudely into the fabric overnight, not in its original form but as grotesque pastiche. The barley sheaf was misshapen, the eels lopsided, the motto spelled incorrectly. Gasps gave way to derisive laughter. The audience, half appalled and half delighted, turned the moment into a performance of its own. Councillor Crick rose in outrage, demanding order, while the mayor turned crimson with embarrassment. The crest, once a symbol of dignity, had been reduced to a prop in the town's farce. Afterwards, Purbright inspected the stitching. It was hurried, uneven, nothing like the fine work of Mrs. Kemp. The thread was coarse too, lacking the sheen of the earlier fragments. "This," he said, "is not her hand. It is someone eager to mock both the arms and her, someone who knew she would be blamed for it." Love scowled. "So Birtle, then. He has access to cloth, and he'd love to see her ruined. Or Crick, with her vendetta." "Perhaps," Purbright replied. "But let us not rush. The guilty hand reveals itself most clearly not in what it shows, but in what it cannot conceal." Over the next few days, Flaxborough's gossip became vicious. Mrs. Kemp was accused of hysteria, of witchcraft, of conspiring to shame the town deliberately. Some muttered that she should be made to leave altogether. She walked the streets with dignity, but her eyes betrayed strain. In the midst of this, Purbright paid a quiet visit to Mr. Birtle's workshop. The upholsterer greeted him nervously. "Inspector, I hope you found the true culprit. This scandal's bad for business." Purbright's gaze rested on a workbench. There, half hidden under a bolt of fabric, lay coarse thread of the same type used in the parody crest. He lifted it gently. "This is an unusual stock, Mr. Birtle." Birtle swallowed. "Common enough, Inspector. Any tradesman might use it." "Yet few would use it for fine work," Purbright said softly. "Tell me, did Mrs. Kemp ever request such a thread from you?" "No, indeed. She was particular, only gold and silk for her. This stuff, too rough for her taste." Purbright replaced the thread carefully. "I see. Thank you, Mr. Birtle." When he returned to the station, he remarked to Love, "The play is nearly done. Our thief, who wished to remind us, is exhausted. She would end it now if she could. But the other, the Joker, still performs. And it is the Joker we must catch, for laughter can destroy more cruelly than theft." That night Purbright sat at his desk long after the lamps had dimmed. The fragments of the crest lay before him, the barley, the eels, the patch of gold. The silver thimble glinted beside them. On the wall above, the echo of coarse stitches in velvet seemed almost to mock him. He folded his hands and closed his eyes. The curtain must fall soon, he murmured, but only when every player has taken their bow. The fragments of crest and the parody stitches had transformed Purbright's office into a small museum of indignities. The inspector regarded them as though they were items in a case history, not trophies, but symptoms. Love, less patient, tapped his pencil against his notebook and muttered, "It's Birtle, sir." It has to be. That rough thread in his shop, the spite he carries for Mrs. Kemp, it fits neatly. Neatness, Purbright observed mildly, is rarely the shape of truth. Most crimes resemble frayed cuffs, threads hanging awkwardly where they shouldn't. He picked up the fragment of barley sheaf, running his thumb gently over the stitching. Mrs. Kemp has admitted her part, but the laughter, the mockery, the performance, that is another hand. We must show the town, not merely tell it, who seeks to turn absence into farce. That evening Purbright contrived to visit Mrs. Kemp under the pretence of returning her thimble. She received him in her parlour, pale but composed, her embroidery frame set aside. "You've brought me further disgrace, Inspector," she said, almost without bitterness. "The town thinks me guilty of everything now, stealing, mocking, plotting. And yet you continue to face them." Purbright placed the thimble on the table between them. "That is courage, Mrs. Kemp, but tell me, have you noticed anyone paying you unusual attention since this began?" She frowned. "Birtle, of course. He makes insinuations whenever he can, and Councillor Crick avoids me pointedly, which is much the same as an accusation. But there is also Beasley, the caretaker. He asks after me too often. Once I found him loitering near my garden gate, saying he was making sure I was all right. That seemed odd." Purbright filed this detail away. He thanked her politely and left, his mind turning not to Birtle or Crick for once, but to the caretaker whose access had been unquestioned from the beginning. The following day he summoned Beasley under a casual pretext. The man shuffled in, clutching his cap, smelling faintly of polish and damp wood. His answers to routine questions were nervous but steady. Yet when Purbright asked lightly about the projector slides, Beasley hesitated too long before replying that he never touched such contraptions. After he'd gone, Love leaned forward eagerly. "So it's him, sir? The caretaker? He had the run of the building. He could plant the slides, stitch the parody, drop the papers." "Possibly," Purbright said, "but consider, Beasley is a timid man. Timid men rarely mock publicly for fear of discovery. Yet he may have been persuaded, or directed." That evening Purbright staged a small experiment. He invited Councillor Crick, Mr. Birtle, and Mrs. Kemp to a discussion of the crest's restoration in the assembly room. Love was uneasy, but Purbright merely said, "The guilty hand betrays itself when it must share a stage." They gathered at dusk, the curtains looming heavily above. Mrs. Kemp sat with quiet dignity. Birtle fidgeted, Crick bristled. Beasley lingered near the door. Purbright spoke mildly about the town's desire to see the crest restored, then produced the fragments recovered so far. He laid them carefully upon a table. "Here we have the barley, the eels, the golden thread. The crest is almost whole again, and yet someone here preferred to reduce it to a joke. The question is, why?" Silence settled, tense as velvet folds. Birtle coughed. Crick sniffed. Mrs. Kemp kept her eyes lowered. Purbright picked up the parody crest with its coarse thread. "This, as you can see, is not Mrs. Kemp's hand. She works in gold, not sackcloth. But someone wished us to believe it was hers. Someone planted ridicule to cover their own pettiness." His gaze moved slowly across the group, pausing at Birtle, then at Crick, and finally resting, almost gently, on Beasley. The caretaker flushed, his hands gripping his cap. I never—" "No one said you did, Mr. Beasley," Purbright interrupted softly, "but laughter follows you curiously. You are always there to discover what has been planted, always first to report. That is useful. Too useful," Beasley stammered. But before he could protest further, Birtle burst out defensively. "It was her fault in the first place. If she hadn't stolen it—" Purbright raised a hand. "Indeed, Mr. Birtle, but theft and mockery are two different crimes. One sought remembrance, the other sought humiliation. And humiliation, I suspect, has its roots in resentment." He set down the parody crest and fixed his eyes calmly on the upholsterer. "Rough thread, from your own stock. Coarse work disguised as hers. It was you who mocked her grief, Mr. Birtle. You who turned the crest into sausages rampant and stitched misshapen barley. Not out of wit, but out of spite. Bertle's face mottled crimson. That's nonsense. You've no proof. Proof enough, Purbright replied, his voice low but steady. The thread in your shop, the projector slide slipped into a locked cabinet by someone used to slipping things in unnoticed, and your eagerness, always to direct suspicion to Mrs. Kemp. Too eager, too neat. Crick gasped. Mrs. Kemp raised her head in astonishment, and Beasley looked faintly relieved. Bertle sagged into his chair, muttering about injustices. Purbright concluded quietly, Mrs. Kemp acted in sorrow. But you, Mr. Bertle, acted in malice. You turned the town's dignity into a farce because you could not endure hers. The meeting broke up in subdued disorder. Councillor Crick scurried off, scandalised yet satisfied. Mrs. Kemp lingered long enough to murmur a strained thank you. Bertle was left pale and cornered, Love attending to him with the quiet efficiency of duty. When at last they were alone, Love said, "So it was both of them, sir. She took it, he mocked it." "Precisely," Purbright said. "And the town will prefer the mocking to the theft, for it stings their pride more deeply. They will forgive sorrow sooner than satire." He stood before the heavy curtains one last time, gazing at the pale oval where the crest belonged. "All the world a stage, Sergeant, and in Flaxborough, even curtains cannot keep the play from spilling over." The assembly room, even emptied of its councillors and performers, still held the faint echo of that final confrontation. The great curtains hung as they always had, velvet folds brooding in silence, yet something of the town's restlessness seemed woven into their fibres. Now! Purbright, standing with his hands behind his back, took one last long look at the pale oval where the crest should be. It was not yet returned, not wholly. Fragments lay in his office waiting for careful restoration. The arms, like the dignity of Flaxborough, would be stitched back together, though neither would ever be quite the same. In the following days, the town absorbed the truth with its usual blend of indignation and self-congratulation. Word spread quickly that Mrs. Kemp had acted out of grief, not malice, and that it was Mr. Bertle who had turned sorrow into spectacle. People at the Empire Café agreed solemnly that Arabella had suffered enough, and that besides, her motives had been practically noble. At Mrs. Plackett's, the hairdryers hummed alongside theories that Bertle's punishment would surely involve exile from polite upholstery, and perhaps the ignominy of discounting his stock. Bertle himself, interviewed under Purbright's calm questioning, admitted little, but protested much. He spoke of unpaid bills, of years of being looked down upon, of Councillor Crick's patronage going elsewhere. He did not confess outright to stitching the parody or planting the slides, but his evasions carried the flavour of guilt. When pressed, he declared with injured pride that the town had always laughed behind Arabella Kemp's back. I only gave them the stage. Purbright let him speak until his words grew circular, then dismissed him with quiet finality. It would be for the council to decide what consequences his spite had earned. As for Mrs. Kemp, she returned to her villa and resumed her embroidery with a kind of weary dignity. Purbright visited her once more, bringing the fragments of the crest she had not yet surrendered. She accepted them with trembling fingers, then placed them carefully in a wooden box. "They will restore it," she murmured, "and no one will think of my husband again." But for a short while, Inspector, they did remember. Purbright inclined his head. "Memories forced are seldom kind, Mrs. Kemp, yet they are memories none the less." He did not offer judgment, only a tone of courtesy that softened the sting. She thanked him with a faint smile, and he left her to her needle and thread. The Borough Council convened an emergency meeting to discuss the affair. Councillor Crick, vigorous as ever, demanded new safeguards, stronger locks, stricter rules of access, perhaps even the presence of police at rehearsals. Mayor Biddlecombe, red-faced and weary, preferred to declare the matter closed as swiftly as possible. "The town has had its joke," he sighed. "We must now put it behind us." His sentiment was applauded by those who wished to forget their own role in spreading rumours. The curtains themselves were left untouched for a time, the pale patch like a scar reminding all who passed beneath it of the town's foolishness. Later, a professional restorer was engaged to reattach the arms, with fresh backing. When at last they were unveiled again, this time without speeches, without ceremony, they looked much as before, yet older, wiser somehow, as if velvet could bear memory. In the quiet aftermath, Purbright sat once more at his desk with Sergeant Love across from him. The younger man, still restless, tapped his pen thoughtfully. "It seems almost absurd, sir, all this fuss over a crest. A patch of embroidery causing weeks of scandal." Purbright smiled faintly. "Absurdity, Love, is simply truth seen from too close. Step back, and you'll see it is no different from thefts of jewels or forgeries of cheques. Pride and grief are the strongest currencies in towns like ours. They pay for more mischief than money ever does." Love nodded slowly, though the lesson sat uneasily with him. He was a man who still preferred facts to feelings, clear guilt to blurred motives. Yet he could not deny that the case had held the whole town in its thrall without a drop of blood or a stolen penny. The following week, Flaxborough returned to rhythm. Market stalls shouted their wares, gossip returned to more familiar topics, and the Empire Café steamed its windows with talk of harvests and influenza. Mrs. Kemp remained politely on the fringes, acknowledged with courtesy if not warmth. Birtle's reputation sagged like a cushion left in damp. Customers avoided his shop unless necessity forced them in. Councillor Crick resumed her campaigns for cultural improvement, now speaking more loudly than ever, as though to drown out her own satisfaction in Arabella's disgrace. One evening, as drizzle softened the lamps in the marketplace, Purbright walked homeward with his umbrella tilted at an angle only he could have found logical. Love accompanied him, still pondering. "So the town will forget, sir. They always do." "Forget in words, perhaps," Purbright replied, "but not in a glance. Mrs. Kemp will always be the woman who stole the crest, though they call it grief. Birtle will always be the upholsterer who mocked his betters, though they call it malice. Such things are stitched into the fabric of memory. The curtain may close, Love, but the audience never entirely disperses." Love gave a quiet sigh, half respect, half weariness. "And you, sir? What do you make of it in the end?" Purbright paused beneath the shadow of the town hall, its windows dark, its velvet hidden within. "Those people, Sergeant, are not much different from curtains. They hang heavy with their histories, they conceal what they must, and when pulled aside they reveal more of themselves than they intend. But in the end they always fall back into place, and the play begins again." He adjusted his umbrella, nodded once, and continued down the quiet street towards the police station, where paperwork and routine waited patiently for him, as they always did. Behind him, the assembly room stood silent, its curtains at rest, the crest once more safe in its place, though the town around it had been altered in ways too subtle to measure.